Pop Mom's happy pills and go fishing with Dad. We have an eye-opening episode that puts weapons to shame. This week's episode gives us a huge It origin story, updates on the Pennywise daughter theory, and a scene that gave me PTSD from high school.
I can't believe Tim likes me.
A few moments later.
No! No!
Guys, it's not what it looks like!
So join me and Derry as we take on this week's biggest mysteries, and be sure to like and subscribe and drop a red balloon in the comments, and maybe my video will float to the top of the algorithm. The episode begins along the streets of Derry, where I guess the kids can just roam in the middle of the street without getting run over. In my previous videos, I've gone over some of the various establishments on Main Street, but I want to go over this one we haven't really looked into, the Arrowhead Hotel. This isn't in the movies, which leads me to believe it might be a nod to the military's Project Arrowhead from King's novel The Mist, a project which ripped reality open and let creatures and the mist in. The military messing around with a supernatural entity? What could go wrong? The gang, comprised of Rich, Will, Ronnie, and Loony Lily, hurry their asses over to Police Chief Bowers. Last night they engaged in a séance to bring out the dead, followed by breaking into the school's photography lab. They want to show what they've developed, but when Bowers takes a look, it's a bunch of shit. Literally pigeon shit. Even this photo of Pennywise they believe to be a statue. But I want to know what happened to this picture. Where did that one go? Honestly, it probably wouldn't have made a difference either way. You'll notice it's Ronnie and Will who interrupt Rich as he tells them about what they're doing in the cemetery. As two black kids growing up in the 1960s, I'm sure Will and Ronnie are used to the cops not believing them, hence why they give each other this knowing look when interrupting Rich and making up a lie about what they were actually doing. I also want to bring up the Phil and Matty are still alive theory. You'll remember Phil and Matty from episode 1. We never see either of them actually die. Then in episode 2, their faces on the cereal boxes are normal compared to Teddy and Susie's. In episode 3, neither of their bodies appear as ghosts in the cemetery, and now in episode 4, there's a lot of talk about who, how, and why the entity goes about choosing its victims and which ones it lets live. So how does the entity choose who lives and dies? As seen in episode 4, the entity could have killed several of our characters at any time, instead deciding to keep them alive to harvest off their fear. It's Will Hanlon who posits the best theory I've heard so far. The entity can sense adrenaline and cortisol in the blood, what Will calls our fear hormones. The entity must be able to sense this and, depending on our levels, let us live or die. As Will states, it will stalk us until we smell just right, so it's possible, depending on these levels, that the entity will decide to do one of three things: let you live, let you die, or take you back to its lair to float. This is likely where Phil and Matty are, and if you stick around to my trailer sleuthing section, I think we'll have a lot more floaters in the episode to come. That didn't sound right. I like this little detail that the Derry High School mascot is the Trapper. It fits in with Maine's history of fur trapping, but also the fact our kids are essentially trapped in this town with it. With Ronnie's dad bound for Shawshank, Stephen King's infamous prison, time is of the essence, so Lily decides to meet with a woman who knows a lot about Derry's past in the hopes she might offer some insight. If you've been following my channel, you'll know I came out with a full video on the Pennywise daughter theory, which involves this still yet to be named woman. So check that out if you haven't already. For now, I'm going to focus on just the new pieces of information. First, look what she's wearing. Pennywise red, just like how we saw red balloons with her as a child. That is, if you believe that's her as a child. She also loves to bring up her father. This is the second time she uses her dad's words, stating, "With good friends at your side, anything is possible." But the most important thing this scene reveals actually lays in what it doesn't do. It doesn't really advance the plot in any way. You could take this scene out of the episode and the episode would still work. So why have this scene in here? One, it's a gentle reminder to us, the viewer, this character still exists, vital if she'll end up being some sort of big reveal later on. Two, she gives us some interesting exposition, that a bunch of kids went missing in the 1930s. Back then, this character would have been in her late 30s or early 40s because the actress who plays her is currently 67, and if we deduct the entity's 27-year cycle, that's what we get. The 1935 cycle coincides with the Bradley Gang massacre. The automobile from that heist was retrieved at the military dig site at the end of episode 2. Y'all know I think this woman is bad news, as it's most often the ones who help our protagonists the most that end up being secret villains. Now I gotta put this out there, is this woman even real? The only person that's actually interacted with her so far is Lily, and Lily's been to Juniper Hill, dealing with all sorts of mental health issues, and she's on different medications. Can she even be trusted? I also want to bring up the clown Will sees when creeping on his neighbors. I don't know about you guys, but this doesn't look like Pennywise to me. It's too thin and has these bells on the top of its hair, just like this clown known as a young Periwinkle. Maybe it's this grown-up woman, but whether or not she's actually alive or some sort of manifestation is still to be determined. We do know, however, that this woman encourages Lily to keep on the search. She wants Lily to go deeper down the rabbit hole, hoping it will instill more fear and put them in even more danger. Upon reading about Ronnie's dad, Hank, Charlotte Hanlon decides to take matters into her own hands. This was a major point of contention in Leroy and Charlotte's relationship back in Shreveport, where Charlotte was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. It looks like it'll continue to be here as well. Leroy doesn't want her stirring the pot for fear she could jeopardize his place in the military.
He doesn't question orders, I question everything. That's the dance.
She's putting justice before the stability of her relationship, and you better believe that will come into play later on. She invites Rose in and asks if she should be concerned about the recent slate of missing and murdered children. Unfortunately for Derry and the indigenous people, missing and murdered people isn't anything out of the ordinary. Charlotte would be best to keep the people she loves close. When Rose hears that Leroy's working on some sort of confidential project, that sure doesn't sound like a pipeline General Shaw mentioned. I'm sure these two will continue to work together as the military continues to overstep its bounds. Last episode, after Dick Hallorann's first mission with Leroy, General Shaw asked if there were any special privileges he would like to be afforded. Well, it looks like Dick's got his way with his very own secluded requisition shed, which he intends to convert into a hangout spot where he and other African-American servicemen can put up their feet. This place will become known as the Black Spot. It'll eventually be burned down by a racist group known as the Legion of White Decency. We actually saw a sign from this group on the Welcome to Derry sign. Both Will and Dick survive this attack, with Will passing on this story to his son Mike. Pennywise is mentioned as being here. In It Chapter 1, Mike will see a vision of burning hands clambering out a padlocked door, a recreation of this event. While cleaning up the shed, Hallorann experiences a series of visions. For the most part, these are unintelligible blurs of light, which become clearer, forming these three balls. You might recall these from the movies, and will later see them in the Galloo flashback. These are what's known as the Deadlights, or its true extra-dimensional form. We also have Lily's drainpipe, which Maddie's fingers came out of in episode 1. This is followed by a quick shot of a bathroom, but oddly enough, this isn't Lily's. The layout and shower curtains are different. We'll see someone break into a room where a robed lady sits. Last episode, when Dick was transported to Pennywise's lair, he saw a vision of this same woman, who I believe to be his grandmother. In The Shining, Dick talks about how he was close with his grandmother and how the two of them would have entire conversations with each other in their heads. Another shot of wartime trenches. When Dick encountered the entity, we saw similar flashes of him during the war, which are followed by that same robed woman in the distance. She warns Dick to watch himself and to, quote, keep that lid tight. I like to think she's referring to her lockbox trick we learn about in King's Doctor Sleep. She taught Dick this trick and how it could be used to contain everything from entities, horrible memories, and images by containing it in sealed mental boxes. These flashes we saw in episodes 3 and 4 are likely his contained traumatic memories that risk leaking out, hence why she reminds him, keep that lid on tight. When Leroy asks him what exactly is going on in Derry, he isn't sure himself. All he knows is that it's not good and Leroy should stay out of it. At school, I love the little detail of a clown poster in the background. We'll see a projector playing a film about a nuclear blast, just like the intro credits. We'll even see Bert the Turtle. Turtles have kind of been this hidden Easter egg sprinkled throughout the season. They represent Maturin, a cosmic godlike entity that is its counter. And bonus points if you caught the other hidden turtle in this episode, which I'll reveal a little bit later. Marge's relationship with Lily deteriorated over the course of the first 4 episodes, due in large part to her desperately wanting to be part of the popular clique, the Patty Cakes. And this sad attempt at acceptance comes at the cost of throwing her friend under the bus. She goes along with a plan to have school heartthrob Tim Flanagan embarrass her in front of the school. However, good old Marge has a change of heart. That is before she experiences her first encounter with the entity. Earlier in the day, Marge watched a video on a parasite known as Leocochloridium paradoxum, also known as the zombie snail parasite. This parasite latches onto a snail and grows long, swollen brood sacs which crawl into the snail's eyes, making it look like a delicious grub for predators to chow down. This is how the entity manifests for Marge, turning her eyes into these grotesque, elongated stalks. The parasite itself is also the perfect metaphor for the entity, something that feeds off the town members by taking over their mind and body. And if things couldn't get any worse for Lily, she tries to save her friend, only for the entire school to catch her on top of her with a tool used to scrape out her eye. Will Lily be sent back to Juniper Hill? If you stick around to my trailer sleuthing section, I think we have an answer. That no-good Charlotte's been snooping in her son's drawers, and instead of finding Playboys, finds something much worse: amateur photography. Will opens up to his mother about what's going on, but it's interesting he never mentions anything supernatural. He simply states that it feels like someone is coming after him. This prompts Charlotte to arrange a fishing date with Leroy. Leroy and Will are somewhat opposites. Leroy is more of a man's man who you'd find tossing a football with his boy, while Will is a man of science. He'd rather watch the stars than go fishing, but it's nice to have some quality time with Dad and muse about a girl he may or may not be into. The show is definitely setting up a potential romance between him and Ronnie. Now, it wouldn't be a horror show if we didn't have Dad leaving Will all alone. And can we take a moment to realize just how gorgeous Derry is? I can't believe they shot this an hour from where I live. I should probably take my car out there and do a video on the real-life locations they shot this in. Will is grabbed by the entity who has taken the form of his greatest fear, his burned father. He'll later tell the gang that he'd often have nightmares of his dad's burned body emerging from his downed plane during the war. This likely explains Leroy's burn marks on his arms and how he lost function of his small amygdala, which essentially shuts off his ability to experience fear. What's really strange is that Will is physically injured by this attack, with blood on his hands. This, combined with him and Leroy seeing that creepy red balloon, proves to Leroy that something is really going on here. When he investigates the intruder Will sees outside their home, he'll see another red balloon, prompting him to go to General Shaw and ask what the hell is going on. General Shaw is running out of time with Project Precept. He and Colonel Fuller know a lot more about this entity than they've let on. For example, they know about this cycle, referring to how the entity comes back every 27 years. And the latest cycle will soon be over, at which time the weapon will be gone to ground. So he takes drastic measures and sets up a trap for the local indigenous boys so they can capture one to be interrogated by Dick Hallorann. To give Leroy a better idea of what they're up against, Shaw allows him to take part in Dick's interrogation. Here we have Rose's nephew, Taniel, who is caught scoping the base. He's not willing to give up what he knows, but Hallorann has other methods of extracting this information. He can go into his mind. This is the first time we've seen Dick's powers manifested this way through a selection of doors. Behind them is Taniel as a child, and Dick manipulates him by posing as his aunt and asking him to recite the story of the entity's origin, an entity known as Galloo. When I started It Welcome to Derry, I was expecting a Pennywise origin story, which I think we're still going to get, but never a full 10-minute origin on the entity itself. This is a story millions of the years in making, before humans even set foot in the Americas. An object described as a falling star crash lands into a hole in what will become the western woods of Derry. The impact set free the entity known as Galloo, who for millennia stalked and preyed among the creatures of the forest, but all that changed with the arrival of the Native Americans. This could be anywhere from 13,000 years ago when the first humans arrived in Maine. They discovered that the stone which brought Galloo here was actually its cage. It keeps the entity at bay, so it's entirely possible Galloo was trapped in this material by some other alien race and shipped off into space. A dagger created from this material was used to keep the nearby village safe, and an uneasy truce was created between them and the entity. They reached a balance with the monster. It would never harm them if they stayed out of its territory. That all changed with the arrival of the settlers. The indigenous tried to warn them, but the settlers hunted the woods until they became the hunted. Galloo fed off their fear and grew stronger, so strong that it could expand beyond its borders. If left unchecked, it's very possible that Galloo's power could expand further and further until no one was safe from its grasp. The ancient dagger was no longer strong enough to keep the monster at bay, thus the villagers decide to leave. But the daughter of the village's great war chief thought there was another way. She took the dagger into the woods with two of her friends, and I love how even hundreds of years ago there's this theme of teens going on their own to stop it. Of course, Sesqui and her warriors, upon realizing the kids have gone, head into the forest where they're picked off one by one. I was totally shocked at this manifestation of a Christian priest whose chest opens up to reveal a demon baby Jesus, complete with a crown of thorns. It stabs Sesqui with a spear just like Christ was stabbed with one by a Roman soldier on the cross. Sesqui succumbs to her wounds and her daughter ventures back to Galloo's cave, the same ones we saw the losers in It Chapter 2. She'll break off shards from the entity's ancient star. These shards would then be covered in turtle shells, another reference to Matron, where they would be buried at 13 markers around the forest. These shards are most likely what General Shaw referred to as beacons in episode 2. They point to what the military is really after, Galloo himself. That's why Shaw said last episode what they're searching for was buried 300 years before the invention of the automobile. Imagine you were the US military and had control of these shards. You could let Galloo loose on Russia without fear it would harm your men. So the plan seems to be to use Dick Hallorann not only to find Galloo, but to trap it and weaponize it against the Russians. Hallorann asks Taniel where the pillar/beacon locations are which contain these shards. Suddenly a door opens showing the Neibolt House where Taniel says, "Follow the tunnels under the old well, there he will find the pillars." It's fun to see the Neibolt House looks just as shitty as it did in the 80s. Director Andy Muschietti has stated that the show will delve deeper into the history of this house, so maybe we'll even get more flashbacks. The Neibolt location is often cited as Derry's first known feeding event, as the land was previously the site of a beaver trapping camp where 91 settlers mysteriously vanished in the winter of 1791. Back in town, Charlotte continues her investigation into Hank Rogan and asks Police Chief Bowers if it's possible they have the wrong guy. Not a surprise that he's steadfast in his decision, but when Charlotte asks if she can talk to him, she's promptly denied. Only family and legal counsel can do that. I did a little research and found that's not entirely the case, and at the time it was most likely at the discretion of the sheriff. But we already know Bowers doesn't want anyone snooping into the Grogan case, as he was pressured to bring him in anyway. You better believe he's going to have his eyes on Charlotte going forward. So Charlotte ends up looking up Hank's address in the phone book, and I love how you can still see the closed theater in the background. She'll end up meeting Hank's mother, Luella Grogan, who confirms that Hank was indeed out of the house during the time of the murders. But why is it that Hank won't tell anyone what he was really doing that night? Charlotte comes back armed with a written letter of permission from the family and threatens to have the news media and freedom fighters on their doorstep if the police don't let her see Hank. Charlotte's plan is to file papers showing prejudicial treatment and discrimination, which would allow Hank to go on house arrest until his trial. This, however, will take some time, and he'll likely be sent to Shawshank for a few days before it's all worked out. But again, this all goes back to what was he actually doing the night of the murders? What could be so secret that you're willing to spend the rest of your life in jail? According to Hank, he was having relations with a married white woman. A scandal, if found out, could have him lynched. But who could this married white woman be? The show hasn't introduced us to any such woman. Lily's friend doesn't wear a wedding ring and her mom's a widow. Is it no one of consequence, or could it be the wife of one of our characters, the sheriff, for example? Hank tells us that it just kind of happened, which might imply the entity had some hand in it. Now we head on over to our trailer sleuthing section, where we take a look at footage we haven't yet seen to see where the story might take us. Here we have a bunch of students clamoring for the door. I think this is some sort of school dance. We'll see Patty and the others come under the spell of Galloo, who, at this point, has likely taken on the form of Pennywise. We'll see Pennywise set against this flaming background with zombie-like figures behind him. Those are likely children, and this might be what leads to the town putting up all these missing children's posters, one of whom is Patty. Hank being sent to Shawshank. We already know from Charlotte he's likely to spend a few days there before the proper paperwork can be filled out arranging his release. Lily here looking at albums showing Bob Gray, the man who will become Pennywise. I highly recommend you check out my Pennywise daughter theory video as I go into this way more in depth. We do see in the visit to set video that there will be flashbacks to that carnival that feature Pennywise the Clown. The gang on their way into the sewers with a new addition, Marge. We'll see her in the hospital, perhaps Juniper Hill if they think she's crazy, and later with an eye patch. She's lost that eye for good. One of the members of the indigenous group claims they have 25 disappearances and 7 deaths. Is he referring to members of his tribe, or this event that happens with the kids? Pennywise in the basement of some sort of old building in black and white. We'll see a nurse here, making me think we could be underneath Juniper Hill. The Mist is another big event that takes over Derry. I've mentioned how this might be tied to the Mist and Project Arrowhead. Leroy will team up with Taniel, so I'm expecting Leroy to drift further and further away from his military superiors. Here's Taniel again entering the Neibolt House. Perhaps he's showing them where the pillars are. Marge holding on to Sesqui's dagger. I wonder where they found it. In this shot, we'll see Ronnie holding on to that same dagger as they pass floating school children. At a dig site, one of the turtle shells is dug up, indicating they found one of the 13 beacons. It looks as though Hank makes it out of Shawshank, as we'll see him here on the set at the Black Spot. And that about does it for this week's video. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think will happen next? I want to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and for more bad takes you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkStoryYT. Until next time, remember,
Daddy loves you very much.